Hi, part threes. We begin morality and ethics, our next module, on Friday, July the 16th. So let's get to it. This is a really heavy duty one. Scripture, incredibly important, sets the foundation, is something we really need to be rooted in and understand, as I hope you have seen through this module, that we have to be more of a first witness account as opposed to a third party sort of getting information. Okay, so once we establish that, and once we know how to use scripture properly and enter into our story and understand where we've been historically and understand the journey, then we have to understand that God has made us as decision makers. Okay, it's a gift. It's a gift of free will. God has given us this incredible opportunity, but also God has made us co-creators with God. And that's really important to understand too, right? That also is a really important gift and responsibility that God has entrusted us with, right? So when we say God created us in the image and likeness of God, that's a lot of responsibility. And one of the ways in which God has made us responsible to be co-creators with God and to continue in the act of creation that was started so long ago is that God gave us the gift of our sexuality. So in this module, we're going to really focus on that. We're going to start off by looking at, again, leadership. Prior to that, the first task, right? What's your vision in your school? We're always focusing on leadership, but our relationship with our own sexuality really has to be defined and reflected on in order for us to properly engage in the church and what the church teaches, and then to be able to explain and work with our students who are struggling with their sexuality. This is a huge component for us as Catholic Christians. It's something we were kind of afraid to talk about for so long. We still are to a certain extent, and there's a lot of confusion and misinformation on this. So let's try to get it straight as you work towards your specialist and potentially your last religion course in your life. Hope it's not, but I teach with that in mind, that a lot of you will stop after this. So this one is really, really important. I can't stress that enough. And then we're going to end with some Church of Social Teachings, building on what you've done in the past years, okay? A lot has happened in the church recently to add to its brokenness. We're all aware of the sexual abuse scandals. We're still dealing with it. We're still trying to overcome that and heal and make it, as right as possible for people that were affected. And now, just last few months when I was dealing with the spring course, the church said they will not bless same-sex marriages. I'm going to talk about that because that happened while I was teaching the course, and we unpacked that. So I'll unpack that with you too, because once you look at the document and the news report, you're going to see there's a bit of disconnect going on and misunderstanding, okay? Likewise with the residential schools, we don't have the full story either. Not being well reported by the media. And we'll talk too about that too. So there's a lot of stuff that we need to unpack and can't do it quickly. So I will try to make this video as quick as possible. But I also want to continue this conversation in our 2 Google Meets next week. Okay. So what about sex? What are we doing with that in terms of understanding this gift? Okay, so God created us basically male and female, but we know there's in between. We've got so many different other variations of creation. We didn't understand that in the past. We are understanding now more than ever the nature of the human being, the nature of sexuality, the nature of how our sexuality defines us, and that it's not clear cut. God did not just create us male and female. There is that spectrum, that scale of different sexual identities, and that we're not fully, female, not fully male. That there could be bits and pieces in, and that's why we have homosexuality, transgender, all these variations of our sexuality where the two identities kind of mix. I don't know if I'm saying that well, but I think you're getting what I'm trying to say. So as I move over here to my handouts here, I'm gonna share this with you. There's a spectrum, right? When I taught this like 30 years ago in the grade 12 religion course, there was something I used called brain sex too, in terms of the level of hormones within us determine how, some women could be more masculine but still be, a woman, right? Some men can be more effeminate, but they're still fully, a heterosexual male, and then we have bisexuality, and then we have homosexual. So all that. So we're going to talk about that, and we've added a lot more into the spectrum now with transitioning, and that's become a reality in our schools. In my last couple of years of chaplaincy, I couldn't believe how many students were coming out and identifying. I've never experienced that before. So now we have permission. You don't have to hide. It's not like all of a sudden we have more people that identify in different ways. It's just all of a sudden, like it's not all of a sudden. It's been a long journey and a lot of sacrifice in some people. But at this point in history, we're identifying, we're accepting, and we're trying to understand the complexity of creation. It's not as straightforward as we have thought for so many years and based our beliefs and our understandings in that. So, also, just in terms of development of our youth, right? There's so many changes, right? Once upon a time, there was no high school. Once upon a time, there was no adolescence. Once upon a time, you went from a child to an adult. Right? And that's the Christmas story, right? Mary was about 13 when she was pregnant, which was normal. Today, a 13-year-old is not normal, right? Doesn't fit into the scheme of life and development, even though physically they are developed, right? And what's happening now is puberty is starting even earlier. So we've pushed those boundaries of our development into different age groups. We're staying in our adolescence stage a little longer, but we're starting to become, moving from childhood to adolescence and then an adult mindset much earlier. Girls are getting their periods much earlier. Puberty's happening much earlier. And what are we doing with that? Once upon a time, when a human being hit puberty, they went to work. They had their families, right? That was the natural evolution. They didn't sit in school for the next 10, 15, 20 years, right? So we need to factor that in, that adolescence is a fairly new addition to the development of the human being. And with that comes all kinds of complications, because in the sexual development of a human being, when those hormones hit, they can really disrupt someone's life. That's when teenagers start slamming the door, right? All of a sudden they don't want to talk to you. They don't want to cuddle with their parents. They're angry and they want their independence, and those are hormones kicking in. And hormones create sort of a violence within as they're developing into an adult, but it's a rocky road getting there, okay? And some can go through it smoothly, and they can still be that sweet child and develop into a young woman or young man. But a lot of times it's turbulent. And the same thing on the other side with menopause and women dealing with menopause. It's like women were like, oh, she's emotional, she's hormonal, blah, blah, blah. We are all our lives, because we're dealing with, our cycles and pregnancies, and hormones are really, really take an effect on someone's body and psyche, right? So we as women have more of that up and down and that turbulence our entire lives. And the same thing with at the end when we hit menopause, the same thing. Some could sail through and some suffer, and some completely change their personalities because the hormones are so strong and violent within. So this is, we really have to take into consideration the development of the human person. And this is why, I started the Google Meet, the first one there, about, male and female spirituality. That's a component. We're trying to be the same, but we are incredibly different. But we have to celebrate and bring together our gifts and our strengths and our weaknesses. Not to say we have to be exactly the same, but we also have to understand we're driven by different things. We're attracted by different things. Different things speak to us. Different things bring out who we are, even our spirituality and our sexuality. And I don't understand why God didn't line us up sexually too, right? Like we peak at different times. There's, male, female. We're not always aligned. Right? And so what was God's plan in that? What was God creating in the context of our unique differences and how we are challenged to try to bring those together? Wow. So here we are as Catholic teachers working under the teachings of the church and dealing with, no longer just in secondary, but in elementary, starting early, even before the hormones kick in, the psychological, social development of adolescence is starting to hit our children as soon as they come into the school system in kindergarten. Because they're being influenced by social media, and even though they don't have the body, they're dressing sexy. They're concerned about maybe what they're eating. They don't want to put on weight. Like they've done studies on this, right? So this is what we're dealing with, right? So 30 years ago, a childhood was more of a childhood. Today, a childhood is almost adolescence at the get-go. As soon as they can walk and talk and watch TV and make choices for themselves, they want to look and be like the people that are influencing them. And then it drags on a little longer because we're not launching, right? So a lot of, when I was younger, a lot of people got married in their early 20s, and it's not happening so much now. It's not so much the norm because we're going to school longer. It's getting harder to get, established in our careers, to buy a house. Financially, things have gone, through the roof. And so people are starting later in life. Right? And so they're having children later, and things are just now delayed a little bit, and that phase has stretched out even a little bit more now. So those are things to consider when we're looking at the church teachings, when we're looking at ministering to our children, our adolescents, and even our young staff. Right? We are ministering to them as well and helping them on their faith journey and their moral development. So as decision makers, I'm going full circle here. God gifted us as decision makers, co-creators. That's a huge responsibility. And so when we get Vatican II, because we know throughout history, people have not been good decision makers. Even the most closest to Jesus made poor decisions, right? We are a history of failures, so to speak, right? But not in the context of, oh God, failure, you're down, you're down. But that failure was needed in order to understand and grow in wisdom and to rise up and to become strong, right? So a lot of the greatest stories and role models in this life are someone who's gone down and has made their way back up and gained strength, knowledge, and courage, and are now can share others to inspire others. And that is our faith story, the same thing, being beaten down, but not staying down, rising up, death and resurrection. Even Jesus, if you look at Jesus, you can label him as a failure. He didn't finish his mission. They killed him. But he didn't stay down. He rose up. And that's life, not to beat people down, not to keep them down when they make a mistake, not to hold them forever in the prison of their brokenness. But we got to release people from their brokenness. We need to open that door and allow them to rise up. Allow them to experience forgiveness and reconciliation. Allow them to rebuild. Allow them to find the strength and the courage to be who God called them to be. And ultimately, in their wisdom, once they've made their way back, to influence and support others. And that's who we are as teachers. But do we understand our church enough to be able to do that for our students? Do we understand our church enough to be able to do that for ourselves? One of the things I learned when I worked at OISE very quickly, having young teachers coming in, trying to discern, am I going to be a Catholic teacher? Am I going to be a public school teacher, right? And what held people back was the issue of their own decision making in their faith journey. And a lot of them didn't feel worthy of being part of the church because they've had a lot of sexual relationships. They were not living by the church rules and, church teachings. Some of them might have been already divorced, right? So you get this mixed bag of, I don't know if I'm worthy. Right? And I remember my first job teaching grade 7 at 23, and I was scared to teach religion because I was like, do I know enough? Have I done, how can I lead my students in faith when I'm not even sure of my own faith journey? And so people hesitate, people are scared, right? There's this fear that surrounds the faith of our Catholic schools. We want to be there. We love our faith, but we're afraid that we are not, fit for the job or that we know enough. And this is where we need to grow, okay? So, Vatican Council II, 63 to 65, John 23rd, totally flipped the church around, okay? At the time, he was just chosen as an interim pope, someone just to hold the church together for a while until the next leader really rose up to, become pope at that time. And so John 23rd was chosen, not too outspoken, not too healthy, might not live that long, and he didn't. But he said, time for fresh air here. And that's where all the changes came. So this was our last ecumenical council in the history of ecumenical councils in the church. I gave you that chart. Take a look at that, okay? And we're still unpacking Vatican II. 63 to 65, this document was created after councils met, discussed, and this is what's the outcome of the modern church. And it was because of Vatican II that I am doing what I'm doing, that I can read the Bible, because up until that point, this is why Catholics sort of lag behind the Protestants, because Protestants were reading the Bible way before us, but we were having the Bible read to us, right? Because we were going to Mass in Latin, we weren't going to Mass in our own language, right? So we didn't understand what was going on really a lot, and we weren't really encouraged to read the Bible. But after Vatican II, it just opened things up. The church physically, architecturally turned around. We didn't have these long, narrow churches. Churches became more communal. The altar came around to the front. The priest celebrated with the people, not the back to the people. The communion rails came down. We started celebrating in our own language, and we were encouraged to read the Bible. And so we're catching up as Catholics. We're not quite there. We have a long way to go, but this is why we're kind of behind. And despite our system that we have kids from kindergarten to grade 12, and they're still coming out not too knowledge about our faith, just as a reflection on us, because we're not sure about our faith because we're still growing into it. It's only been since I'm born 63, so it's only been in my lifetime that all these changes have taken place, and it takes a long time for change to really get instilled and to move things forward and upward. So we're, in the context of history, that we're just in a small part of history, but we are in the time of change in this church. Don't ever say the church is not changing. It is changing, but it just never changes fast enough because we're so used to Apple putting out a new iPhone every September or whatever, car, or, we're updating, quick. Church doesn't work that way. Okay? The church is slow. Why is it slow? Because it's concerned with the dignity of human life. That is the foundation of what the church starts in terms of decision making and moral development. Okay? When the dignity of human life is in question or danger or threatened, that's when the church speaks out. So that's why we got that document on human work by John Paul II. That's why we had the social teachings come out over 100 years ago because of the Industrial Revolution. The church was trying to support the workers who were not being treated well. So the church, has always worked from that perspective, The secular world hasn't. The secular world has worked for profit. And that's why a lot of people are afraid of this vaccine, because pharmaceutical companies put out things before they're fully tested. And then they say, so sorry, so sad. If you've used this and you've gotten ill or died, we're sorry. And then, the legal firms come in and they help you get money for it. But it's never going to give you your health back. It's never going to give you someone that has died. So the church is painfully slow in that respect because they're going to do their research. And they have a lot of people working there. The church is not just sitting around praying. They have lawyers, doctors, like in every capacity of life, they have people in the church and researchers. I used to have Father Rob Allure, a Jesuit, come in and talk to my grade 12 students. He's a bioethicist, and he actually worked full-time at Mount Sinai on the genome, right? So this is our church. So they're just not kind of sitting around holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Like, they're doing hardcore research. They're concerned with dignity of human life, and they're despite what you might think they are or did, they're looking after us. And this is why, we need to know better our church, right? So Vatican Council II dealt with the church in the modern era. It allowed the laity to be involved. And that's why I said again, like me as a woman taking my degree at St. Mike's at the Toronto School of Theology, that wouldn't have happened prior to Vatican II, and I wouldn't be here speaking to you. And then I heard the speakers of this book, they unpacked Vatican II. They were actually there. And when we were listening to them talk, I took a few notes here. And I always share these notes because I find them interesting. It says, we are closer to the beginning of the church than the end. And that's why I'll always call us the early church. We are still the early church. We're still trying to figure it out. 2,000 years later, we're like, what? What are we doing? It's like the disciples. What? What's he saying? What is he doing? Are we going to get in trouble? Right? First council, I think I talked about this yesterday, was Peter and Paul arguing whether to go to the Gentiles or not. So in the list of ecumenical councils I gave you, you can add one to the top, and that's Peter and Paul. Like, what are we doing? Who are we letting in? Are we going to be circumcised? What are we going to keep? What are we going to take away? Right? Because Judaism was totally rooted in like 600 and something laws. And Jesus was like breaking those laws because saying, no, I'm going to heal on the Sabbath. I'm going to, do these things even though the Judaic law is, and that's today's reading. I'm going to talk about that anyways. Trent dealt with the Reformation, and Vatican II dealt with the church for the first time. We are the church, by the way, and I'll refer to that. Church is not just a building. It's not where the priest is. Right here, church. Our schools, church. Your classroom, church. First dealt with the laity, us, hello, all called to holiness, all of us. We should first address the Spirit. So in that, in this particular guest speaker, when they were talking, they said the church is comprised of a ratio of 43 to 100,000. 43 is the hierarchy, the laity is the 100,000. We are the church. We are the church. Vatican Council II, thanks for opening the door and letting us in. We are the church. So that changes the perspective on things, right? When you think about it that way. I can take a breath here. I feel like I'm just running through this, okay? So when we look at these, particularly, I'm going to focus on the two topics on sexuality, and one is what the church teaches and how the church reacts to the LGBTQ2S community, okay? And we go to the catechism. Anything you want to know, go to the catechism, right? So, you could be liberal, you could be conservative. In this church, there is that tension and that polarization that happens, right? I don't know where people put me. I don't like to label myself, but whatever you see me as, I am orthodox in the sense that I will defer to the church's teachings. I don't stray from the church's teachings. I explain the church's teachings in the context of our lived reality, right? So here we go. In the Catechism, section 2358 and 2357. So when you look up the Catechism, okay, they're in sections. There's because of page numbers, every catechism there's bigger ones, smaller ones, and it's laid out differently. So it goes through those sections. I'm going to start with section 2358, and then I'll move back up. Okay, and this is what the Catechism says, and a lot of people don't know this. Um, they do not choose their homosexual condition. It's not a choice. For most of them, it is a trial. I remember when I was first sort of understanding homosexuality, one of my colleagues had said to me, he goes, "Who would choose this? Who would openly choose to be, ostracized by your family and not being able to live out the dreams that everybody else to have a family and children and security and be accepted in society?" I remember some of my colleagues back then, they had to make up a different life. They wouldn't tell us what they did on the weekend because, we knew they had a partner, but they would tell us a different story because they were afraid, right? Because back then now things have changed a lot. They must be accepted with respect. I'm reading the catechism. Compassion, still the catechism. And sensitivity, still the catechism. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. Still reading the catechism. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. And still the catechism. But this is the troubling part. I'm going to move up the section. And it says here, homosexual acts of great depravity. Homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. That's the problem. And this is the stumbling block in terms of fully accepting our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ2S community, even though all that we're supposed to do what I read just in section 2358 is that the church is still rooted in its teachings on marriage in two areas. It needs to be procreative and unitive. That is the foundation of the church's belief in terms of what the church blesses as a sacrament in the church. That still has not changed. Oops, my alarm, because I know I've got to do something at half an hour. And that's where we really struggle in terms of fully accepting everyone into the church, right? And because they cannot have children, right? In terms of the way they're created, that's where it stops. I know we could argue there's heterosexual people that can't have children, physically, because some people can't, but they might not know that before they get married, right? Like we're not supposed to know that before we get married, so to speak, right? And this is why this came out in the spring, where the German church has started blessing homosexual marriages, and they put it out to the Doctrine of Faith at the Vatican, and they said no, and this blew up in the media, right? And really, it hasn't changed anything because that is the church teachings, number one. But the German church, they were getting ready for their synod, right? So these questions were being asked. Their response was, "Well, we're still going to do it anyways." Right? So there are members of the church. They're still doing things despite what may seem like going against the church. But in the church teaching, there's only two infallible statements that have been made by a pope. And that came out of Vatican I, papal infallibility. And they only deal with Mary. They don't deal with sexuality. They don't deal with morality, right? And so we as a church in 2021 are trying to unpack church teaching, unpack scripture, unpack it in terms of the current reality of what we are discovering about being human. Will it change? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it'll change in my lifetime. Might change. I don't know where God is guiding the Spirit. There's a power greater than us that's directing us, that's guiding us in terms of, where we are going. God has, stays back and sort of gave us free will. But in the context of that, he's given us wisdom. He's given us people stepping up, giving courage to people to give voice to things, right? And so where's it going? I don't know, but that's where we are now. And it's important for us to understand this and to be able to explain this to our children, to our students. I've had to talk to parents who have children that are transitioning and talk to them about what I just read to you in the catechism to help them understand, to help them support their child in their journey, and not to feel guilty, not to feel ostracized from church teachings, but that they are in a point in history that we're all learning and growing and evolving with. I hope that helps. I know there's probably a lot more I had to say. I'm going to say it at the Google Meet. I do have, I do a lesson on sexuality and road signs. I talk about, our church teachings are almost like rules of the road, right? Because if you think about something that's common with all of us, we are all, most of us will drive or aspire to drive. And, a lot of us need the rules of the road to keep us in line and that we don't hurt ourselves and others, right? Even though we're sensible people. But yet, even with all the rules in the road, people are still taking chances, making poor decisions, getting into accidents, killing others, maybe possibly killing themselves in the process of not following the rules of the road, right? And so I do this, where, school zones, we know we're supposed to slow down. Do we? Maybe. Some don't. They put up radar. Now they get a ticket. Okay, so that's not helping. They put on speed bumps. That's when people slow down because they don't want to hurt their cars. Moral development, decision making. So what are we doing with our sexuality, right? Where are the speed signs, the radar, the speed bumps, right? Who are we hurting? Who are we blessing? Yes, it's an amazing gift to be sexual beings and to use that gift for pleasure, for procreation, for everything that is good about life and pleasure. But at what point are we hurting? At what point are we using this incredible gift of being co-creators with God and having to make a decision about life? Whether you're 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, I don't care. Every time you have sex, you are potentially creating human life. And in that moment in time, are you ready to take responsibility for a life that you may be creating? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. Even if you're married, right? Can you take on another child at this point and support them and love them? That's what the church is trying to help us do. That's the speed bump in the road of our sexuality. And just like the law and with the road, you make a mistake, you get into an accident, you fix your car, you pay your dues, hopefully no one's been injured or killed, and you move forward. And the same thing with our church. The church has forgiveness built in and reconciliation to help us grow and not to feel like we can't be part of this church, right? And we'll talk about divorce, separation, all that in the next module when we talk about sacramentality. And I think that's it, because there's a lot of noise happening now. People are out and about, and I'm going to pray. And we'll continue learning and growing together and trying to figure this all out. So let's continue to keep our community in our prayers and all the needs of our world as we continue to journey together in faith and leadership. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen, and peace be with you. And we continue to listen to Matthew's Gospel today on Friday, July the 16th, on the Sabbath. Jesus went through the grain fields. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain to eat. Remember, Judaism has so many laws for every little thing. And this is why they hated Jesus, because he, being a Jew, claiming to be who he was, connected to God. And yet he was breaking so many of these laws that were so entrenched into the Judaic culture and religion. And so how can he? Who is he? They were just so angry at him, right? When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Jesus said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry?" So he digs deep into history, right? To King David, right? He entered the house of God ate the bread of the presence. It's like going into a church and opening up the tabernacle, and which was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, the gospel of the Lord. And so this is what we're doing in morality and ethics, looking at church laws, church teachings, what is expected of us. And at what point are we able to hold on to the law? And at what point do we have to look at the law when it doesn't serve the greater purpose, the dignity of our lives, when it doesn't feed us in certain situations? How do we deal with that? How do we deal when we don't align ourselves with the church's teaching? That's tough. We all struggle with that, and we carry guilt, or we walk away from the church altogether because it's like, this doesn't make sense. I want nothing to do with this. Oh, there goes that alarm again, telling me to shut up. Anyways, think about that. That's what we're going to unpack together in ethics and morality. How do we navigate? How do we know church law first? Because most of us don't know it, period. We don't know what the church is teaching. We just hear it, a report somewhere. We don't actually read church documents. We don't really know what our church is actually teaching. Even listening just to some of our priests, they have their biases, they have their fears, they have their take on things. But are you, living up to what Vatican II allowed us to do and be full members of this church and take ownership and leadership and learn? That's what I'm asking you. What do you know about church teachings? And how can you apply it and deal with, some of the things that you might be struggling with in the church? Because you might be surprised. I am all at the time. Have a great day. Peace.